Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Michaela Peters. I want to start off by saying thank you to you, my audience, because sometime in the middle of last week I was worried about whether I would ever reach 5K subscribers by the end of the year, and now I'm already at 6K. If I reach 10K, that would be crazy. So I know a lot of the videos are like, don't forget to like and subscribe, but sure, you can do that here if you want to, that'd be great. Okay, so the purpose of this video, and I'm afraid that this won't be very interesting to a lot of my audience since most of my audience is probably not US citizens, although I was looking at my statistics yesterday and it seems like right now Finland is pulling in the lead, followed by Russia, followed by the US. So maybe there are a sufficient number of Americans watching this or people based in the US. However, this is going to apply specifically to US citizens. I already talked about how to get into NASA as a foreign national, or at least what my advice on that would be. And today I'm going to talk to you about how to get into NASA as a US citizen, which I'm going to be honest is a little bit easier in some ways. Well, okay, probably all around a bit easier. So one thing I'm going to start off by saying is the government is probably the most anti-nepotistic entity to work for. I wouldn't even say agency, NASA is an agency, but in general, this whole, networking, getting a job through who you know is really not a thing that happens at NASA. I mean, you're free to reach out to people who work there if you have some sort of connection and find out more about it. But working at NASA is kind of one of those things where people are already fairly inundated, probably with people randomly trying to contact them. I already get randomly contacted for people wanting to work at the company I'm at now, and I'm not even at like a big name company, but it happens. Okay, so I wouldn't say the nepotism thing is really the route to go unless you just want information specifically because you yourself are trying to make an informed decision about whether you want to work at NASA. And the way that it happened for me, and I guess this background would be kind of important because it probably contributed to me getting my job at NASA, even though, again, wasn't really through a nepotistic route. It wasn't like the person who I knew at NASA was able to refer me in any way. All they could do was give me instructions on how to apply. So my aunt and uncle knew somebody who worked for NASA in Houston, Texas, and they sent me to go stay with her for a week. I shadowed a bunch of engineers at NASA. This was part of my aunt and uncle's ploy to get me to switch my major to engineering, which, for better or for worse, never happened. Another fun fact I'm going to throw out there, and these are very dated statistics, so don't quote me on these. Okay, because I joined NASA in 2017, so yeah, that's a throwback. 25% of the workforce at the NASA Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas are business people, and 75% are engineers. So yeah, while most people are engineers, being an engineer there is much more competitive than being a business person at NASA because business people don't generally dream of working at NASA. They more so dream of probably working on Wall Street or something like that. So getting in as an engineer, from my understanding, is a little bit more competitive. So I'll start off with that. Okay. So again, I was given instructions on how to apply. And again, this is old information. I would have to look this up. The one standard way is the US... through US, what is it called? usjobs.gov, that website, the Pathways program. So what I was doing when I was going to apply for NASA, because I really wanted to get into the Pathways program because it was more of like a shoe-in directly to being able to work for NASA as a civil servant. There's also this whole thing about being a civil servant versus being a contractor. There are pros and cons to both, but being a civil servant is a much more coveted position due to the fact that you have a lot more job stability. Now, I had gone back to NASA somewhat recently, was it a year ago? Wow, okay, well that feels recent at this point in my life. And I know that one of the downsides of this can be, and this is kind of what I see in Finland, is that people maybe are not as motivated because the risk of them losing their job is pretty low. But if you have really good, like security benefits, pension-like kind of thing, it's technically called a thrift savings plan at this point. But versus if you're a civil servant, you could technically you're like if you're a civil servant, you will not be let go first, but if there are ever budget cuts, the contractors are the ones who are going to be let go first. And you just don't have as good of benefits. You generally make more money, like take-home pay. It's just that, the whole appeal of working for the government, again, is like the benefits and the health insurance and all the things you have access to that are not necessarily just money. Okay, so yeah, I mean, and to be very transparent, the government does not pay fabulously. I've talked about that quite a bit on here. If I were to have started working at NASA, I think my entry salary would have been somewhere around 50, 60K. which I think the median income in the US is like 74. And, I work for a corporation now, and yes, I did not have to start that low. So, I will be transparent about that. I'm just saying these are all things you might want to consider before you invest your time, resources, and energy into getting into NASA, because it was a very long saga, I suppose, for when I was trying to get in. So what I used to do is I used to log on every single day, usajobs.gov, and type in NASA pathways. And I would apply to anything and everything, even if I was relatively unqualified. I would apply to IT ones. I would apply to HR ones. Like, in the end, I ended up doing something more general business, which, again, is not necessarily what I studied. I studied business analytics, and I like to do something a little bit more technical than just general business functions. So when I was at NASA, it was like budget, procurement, project planning. Engineering is going to look a lot different than that. And obviously there are a bunch of different disciplines in engineering. So you're going to keep an eye out for whichever one you want. Also, it depends how picky you are about what center you want to work at. I was picky, and if you're not picky, this is going to make it easier for you. I really wanted to work either at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland. Pretty much I grew up around there, and I have friends and family in the area, so that was part of it. Or Houston, Texas, because I had like one friend there. I guess the only times I've went somewhere where I didn't know somebody was when it was abroad. Okay, anyway. So I would just log on. That site was pretty streamlined. Like, once you already have your resume in there, it's just like, it would take me like 5 minutes, and I would just go on every single day that I was like at school. And usually they would call me, and I interviewed with 4 different NASA centers. A whole other long story, but, one of them I'd already accepted another job. The second one, I made the call. I didn't want to go live in the desert in California and do HR stuff. The one in Ohio for HR didn't want me, and Houston originally didn't want me, and then they called me back and they were like, just kidding, we want you. So, I interviewed a bunch of times, and I was looked at as it was very good. So, like, good experience. And how'd those interviews go? They're more behavioral-based questions. I actually do have a list of those questions. I probably shouldn't disseminate those, but, like, I'm just trying to remember. I should have looked at those before I recorded this. Tell me about a time where you had to take on, like, a leadership role. It's a lot of, like, demonstrating leadership, demonstrating that, and you're involved in clubs. In the U.S., we really care about people being, like, well-rounded and, just, like, involved in being a leader in certain clubs. Like, that is very important. So I wasn't really that, like, involved like that. I was a commuter, so, like, I just, like, was very limited on time. So the way that I talked about involvement was, like, I would put together these sort of, like, de facto study groups, and I would just talk about that in my interviews, and they, like, loved that. So whatever that experience is like for you, talk about that. I also am very passionate about helping people get jobs in NASA, so you can, like, reach out to me personally. I can do, like, a pseudo interview with you. I would be more than happy to do that. I actually did that with one of my friends, and I just remember he had, like, this very amazing story about starting a rocketry club at his high school, and I was like, wow, this story is so amazing. Like, have you ever talked about this in your interviews? And he's like, well, no, because he was also in this position where he was more of, like, doing contractor internships and couldn't necessarily get in to the civil servant side. So I was trying to help him, like, cross over, because I think he had done one interview and it hadn't really turned out well for him. Like, he didn't have success. But after I prepped him, he, like, had success, and I felt really good about that, and I was really happy. So that was cool. So I like, this is actually something I do care about and I like doing. So, again, feel free to reach out, but I know this is, like, a very small subset of my audience. And also the reason why I bring up the nepotism thing is because I feel like, nepotism is still a thing in the US. Like, my restaurant job, which I have to go to later today, I did get through my mom knowing somebody at the restaurant. And my very first internship that I had back in 2016, I got from one of my grandmother's clients when she used to be a hairdresser, which she's not anymore, but anyway, not relevant. So, but nepotism is, like, a lot more alive and strong, I think, in other countries. Like, the job that I had when I was working in Finland, I did actually get that job through, like, word of mouth networking. It was not, like, a formal position, and they talk a lot in Finland about this hidden job market. But anyway, the NASA jobs are nothing like this, so that's kind of, I'm trying to draw that delineation. It's very deliberate, and you need to go online and apply. So I personally advocate for the Pathways program because if you like know that you want to work at NASA, and believe me, people like know they want to work at NASA, and my decision to leave NASA, I always say, was one of the hardest decisions I ever made in my life. And the only reason I did it was because I went on to do something I was much more passionate about, which was studying Russian, because the level of Russian I have now would not have happened if I had not left NASA. And I can always go back to NASA, and I do toy with the idea from time to time, not gonna lie about that, because I did like it, and I like super loved that community, and like got along really well with the people I worked with, and it was great, honestly. Like, I get pretty nostalgic for it. Okay, so I like the Pathways program. The way it works is you do 3 separate tours. You have to. You can do more if you want. Some people do more, but 3 is the minimum. And I personally did mine always in the spring because they're longer weeks-wise, and I wanted to get paid more. And then I always use my summers to travel and go learn Russian usually, because that's when the programs were. The cheaper program, so I would do that. But some people will do, and this is with your bachelor's degree, before you get your bachelor's degree. So some people don't necessarily like this because it kind of slows down their progress with graduating, on time, because some people really care about that. Not me. I could have stayed in school forever, but you got to think about whether you're one of these people and whether you want to be like, older, whatever. But I did like every spring, but I'd say what was more common was like a spring, a summer. You have to keep at least one rotation per calendar year. You can't be gone for one whole calendar year because you'll get kicked out of the program. So, but I'd say like a spring, a summer, fall, then you go back to school, and then you come back to NASA. And then usually by that third time, when you're getting close to graduating, they're going to offer you a job. Now, the Pathways program used to have a conversion rate of 80%. I have heard from my friends who still work there that it has really gone down, and they've become a lot more selective about who they're accepting. I don't know why that's happened. I'm just aware that is more of a thing that's going on now. And, of course, having NASA on your resume looks good, but I'm just saying these are things you may want to consider when you're thinking about applying. Now, that's the civil service, yes, and civil servant route. And again, you have to decide whether that's for you. On the other hand, there are also contracting positions. And so they used to have this thing called like OC. I don't think that exists anymore. And that was through like the Space Research Center. Like, there's also another just NASA intern site, but they've changed it a couple times in the time that I've been there, and I haven't actually done that one, so I'm a little bit less familiar with that. But that is a contractor position. I think I remember talking to people about how they got paid, and I think they just got paid in like a lump sum. It wasn't like me where I got paid bi-weekly like, a normal employee. Yeah, like, I mean, those ones exist. They're contractor positions, but that's a lot more like if you're not very committed to knowing whether you want to work at NASA, that might be a better route. Although I do have one friend who still works at NASA, and I don't even think she ever converted to civil servant. I think she is a contractor still. I would have to ask her. But she started that way, and she's done her whole career at NASA, and, we were interning back there in 2018. She's still there. She's working remotely. Yeah, a lot of people are working remotely for NASA. I don't know if they want people to know that, but I know people that are, so I'm not sure if that's appealing. But also, I think it depends, because the people I'm talking about are either business people or like computer science people, whereas if you're like an engineer and doing something more technical and hands-on, you're probably gonna have to be on site anyway. You should also think about where you want to live. Texas is very hot and uncomfortable. If you're willing to make that sacrifice, good for you. A lot of people aren't, including myself. Let's see if I ever change my mind on that, but there's a lot of other NASA centers that are not located in Texas. There's like 11 or 13 of them or something like that. Some of them don't have a lot of resources. Some of them have more. Some of them are bigger, smaller, whatever. But there's a bunch. So, yeah, I mean, I would look into both options. It really depends on you. I would probably apply to both. I'm pretty sure back when I was applying, I did apply to both. But knowing people is not necessarily going to help you. I mean, you can reach out to people and find out more. Like I said, I did go and actually like visit and shadow different NASA engineers. And so I was able to speak to that experience when I was interviewing. Like, I would always say that, I visited NASA because of like this contact, and what I decided was that I wasn't going to become an engineer because I wasn't always good at science and math, because it's basically what everybody told me. But I was so motivated by how passionate everybody was about their job, and I really wanted to be a part of that. And like really you feel that when you're there, and it's like very amazing. So again, I spoke to that, but I'd say getting into this NASA shadowing experience that I had like with my aunt and uncle's friend, because it was also like she set it up for another one of her like little mentee people. I don't know how else to call her. It's like a younger girl she was like friends with, who she was also like bringing her around to. We went to like a bunch of different companies where people did engineering. One of them was like a pipeline test company thing. I mean, I don't know, a lot of different places. One of them was like more like geology. Okay, again, not super relevant, but yeah, so I had that experience I could speak to, but most people who want to work for NASA don't want to work for NASA because they visited NASA and decided they liked it. So whatever the reason you want to work for NASA is, whether you're really into whatever thing that NASA does, or you've always wanted to be an astronaut, or things that you know about astronauts, or, whatever that is, like, speak to that. For me also, I think like Russian was a part of it. I'm not really sure I spoke to that in my interviews as much, but that was something I got to kind of dabble in when I was at NASA. I actually went around talking to a bunch of different managers about, hey, I speak Russian, so like, what can I do here? And basically they're like, you can go work in Russia. And I was like, I don't know if I want to do that. I don't know. I was like not ready to really like leave my family like that when I was that young, for like more permanent long term. To be fair, I still haven't like actually committed to doing that kind of thing yet. So yeah. I don't know. I'm not sure I really can think of anything else besides just keep applying. Like, I couldn't even tell you how many applications I sent. And to me, it's not important because I got in at some point. I think I like started applying. I had to have a GPA first. I think I started applying at the beginning of 2016, and I didn't find out that I was getting in until like Thanksgiving 2016. I remember I cried. I was actually so happy. Like, probably one of the only times I've cried from happiness. There's been about 5 times in my life. But yeah, it was really cool. But it took a while. It was a process. Like, it was like a year-long process for me. And again, I like rejected some offers and held out for ones that I knew I really wanted, and like, I'm glad I did. So yeah, I mean, it was a great experience. Like, I have nothing but good things to say about it. And if it's what you want, then go for it. And I think it's more than feasible. You got to keep trying, but you also have to think about like what your priorities are, because I'll be very transparent in saying, if you want to be like make tons of money, I'm not sure that the government path is really like gonna do that for you. So, I mean, you will be fine. Trust me, you'll be totally fine. But, just, you gotta, again, people have different priorities. So I'm just being transparent with that. All right. Again, that's really everything I can think of. So yeah, now in closing remarks, I'm just trying to think if it's early to do this. I'm going to try to keep it up with the videos for the next couple days, but then I got to get on an airplane again, and then I'm going to be in Belgium, and it's going to be crazy. So yeah, be with one of my other BFFs who I haven't hung out with in a while. Yesterday I spent time with one of my other BFFs, and apparently it's also laughable how many BFFs Americans have. I think I have like 6, maybe 5, something like that. Yeah, so anyway, my whole point with that is, I'm gonna try to keep it up with recording regularly because the algorithm seems to be loving this, but it probably will not be sustainable for me either after Tuesday or Wednesday. I'm also trying to see if I can sneak in looking at a house between then, so we'll see. But anyway, it's everything that's going on, so I'm gonna keep trying to record. And I need to think of another English topic video because right now I'm out of ideas. So if you can think of one, you can drop it below if you got all the way to the end of this. All right, so thank you everybody once again, and until my next video, bye.